This sounds incredibly promising. Walgreens, CVS for the drive-through test at diagnostics agencies. But we sat here in the Rose Garden back on March 13, and these companies were here, some other companies were here. By my count, only 69 drive-through test sites have been set up by the companies that were here. I'm wondering if you, and of course, Mr. Vice President, back in early March, you said we'd be at 4 million tests by the following week. We're just now got there in the last few days. So what have you learned about what went wrong, a month and a half, or over the last month and a half or 2 months, and what's going to go right now? What lessons have you learned from the mistakes over the last month and a half or so?
John, I appreciate the question, but it represents a misunderstanding on your part and frankly a lot of people in the public's part about the difference between having a test versus the ability to actually process the test. I mean, the truth was, when the president tapped me to lead the White House Coronavirus Task Force 2 months ago, we saw the production of lots of test kits going into the marketplace. But as the president has said many times, what he understood early on was the old system would never be able to process the tests at the massive volume that we would need in the midst of an epidemic. And that's why the president brought together these extraordinary commercial labs that you've heard from today, literally sat them down in the Roosevelt room and said, we need you to turn all of your energies loose on doing the kind of high-speed testing that would be necessary for us to reach the numbers we're at today. And so there was no disconnect at all. There were lots of test kits out there, Admiral, and frankly, there still are today. There are literally millions of tests that could be run in the old-style, slow laboratory that are still conducting tests today, whether it be at the CDC or at state laboratories. But what the president brought about with this public-private partnership has brought us to the point where we've done 5.4 million tests to date, and literally you just heard that by next month we could be doing as many as 2 million tests a week all across the country to give the American people confidence that we can reopen and get our economy moving again.
So when you said 4 million tests 7 weeks ago, you were just talking about tests being sent out, not actually being completed? I'm a little confused.
John, I think they're precisely correct that in my first week on this job, we were informed that HHS, I believe IDT was the vendor, Admiral Giroir, that had distributed 1 million, was distributing another 4 million, and we believe they did. But again, those were tests that, frankly, but for the president's leadership, we'd still be waiting on those tests to be done in many cases, because they were tests that were designed to be run in the old laboratory model.
Can you see how they're laughing at you, ladies and gentlemen? How they're smiling at you? Did you understand what just happened here? The reporter asked the question, a month ago you said we were going to be running millions of tests. And he's like, no. What we said is we were going to send out millions of tests. We weren't going to run millions of tests. And on top of that, he's like, no, you misunderstood. You must be confused. And they're holding back, the smile, the grin. They're grinning at you. It's bad, too. I mean, we got to go back. Now that you know what we're talking about, what we're looking at, what we're thinking about here, it's going to be painfully obvious. If we can. Let's see if we can cue the video guy. It's a little difficult right now, but we're going to do our best to play this little clip again. Pay attention to how they grin. Pay attention to how, just how Trump hands it over to Pence, and then he just starts laughing at the response, inwardly. But you could tell. You can read the micro expressions. Here we go. Let's see if we can cue in the audio.
To give you that understanding.
Go ahead, Jim. Sure, this sounds incredibly promising. Walgreens, CVS for the drive-through test at diagnostics agencies. But we sat here in the Rose Garden back on March 13, and these companies were here, some other companies were here. By my count, only 69 drive-through test sites have been set up by the companies that were here. I'm wondering if you, and of course, Mr. Vice President, back in early March, you said we'd be at 4 million tests by the following week. We're just now got there in the last few days. So what have you learned about what went wrong, a month and a half, or over the last month and a half or 2 months, and what's going to go right now? What lessons have you learned from the mistakes over the last month and a half or so.
John, I appreciate the question, but it represents a misunderstanding on your part and frankly, a lot of people in the public's part about the difference between having a test versus the ability to actually process the test.
I love it. I fucking love it. So the question is, what went wrong? And the vice president comes up and he's like, no, you misunderstood. See, when we said 4 million tests, we meant sending them out the test. We're not processing the test. You totally misunderstood. What, you thought we were actually going to process the test? And you could see Trump just laugh. I got to play this again. I mean, this is like a very classic telling moment, right? And this is exactly the kind of response you get each and every time. What about all these 5G death towers, Mr. President? Oh, you thought I was elected to save you. No, you misunderstood. We came here to fucking kill you. And it's scary. It's fucking really scary right now out there. Let's see if we can cue this back up. Pay attention to how Trump smiles at Pence's answer. This tells you everything about the dynamics of what's going on with this situation. There's a reason why it looks like a catastrophe.
Sure, this sounds incredibly promising. Walgreens, CVS with a drive-through test at diagnostics agencies. But we sat here in the Rose Garden back on March 13, and these companies were here, some other companies were here. By my count, only 69 drive-through test sites have been set up by the companies that were here. I'm wondering if you, and of course, Mr. Vice President, back in early March, you said we'd be at 4 million tests by the following week. We're just now got there in the last few days. So what have you learned about what went wrong, a month and a half or over the last month and a half or 2 months, and what's going to go right now? What lessons have you learned from the mistakes over the last, month and a half or so?
John, I appreciate the question, but it represents a misunderstanding on your part and frankly, a lot of people in the public's part about the difference between having a test versus the ability to actually process the test. I mean, the truth was, when the president tapped me to lead the White House Coronavirus Task Force 2 months ago, we saw the production of lots of test kits going into the marketplace. But as the president has said many times, what he
said was, we're not going to process those tests. We don't want to know what the results are. You can't have an outbreak if you're not testing people. And we've seen the empty testing sites, the empty hospitals. And it's like, what's going on? What is really going on with this situation? What's going on with these death towers? What's going on with the chemtrails and the terraforming of the planet? You are seriously asking that question? You think that's air you're breathing, Neo? You're in the Matrix. You're in occupied territory. You're a slave, Neo. And these people are the gatekeepers. The gatekeepers. Like Bill Gates. The gatekeepers. These CEOs, they're gatekeepers. The people on television, they're gatekeepers. These politicians, they're gatekeepers. They are protecting their agenda, the Agenda 21, the Georgia Guidestones. Have little doubt that these people are out to get you. I mean, you might have had doubts before this, but not anymore. They're out to get you. You need to understand this. You need to understand that the television is not going to help you. They're not going to reveal, the plan. They're not going to help expose what's going on. They've already been co-opted. They've already been hijacked. They're not here to help you. The socialist media platforms, they're not here to help you either. That's why they're shutting everything down. Now, we've got a lot of really interesting things to cover here. I hope everybody understands the point we're trying to make. Did you see Trump, the way he was trying to hold back his grin? I mean, you could almost read his mind as, Trump, or as Pence was saying, oh, you thought we were going to test those people? No. We just said we were going to, deliver the tests. We're not actually going to test people. Can you believe that? That was yesterday. That was yesterday. And I'm not sure, how many people are going to make a big deal about that, but I thought that was really the most shocking thing. Obviously, everything's kind of changed. The demeanor's changed. The answers to the questions are real short. It's like, take your question, real short answer, shut up, sit down. Next. Shut up, sit down. Next. And, they've changed their posture a little bit, but you can tell that they're phony. I mean, these people are as phony as a boob job. We got a couple of boobs right now on television, naked, staring at you. And you can see how ridiculous they are. And yet, nothing changes. Nothing will ever change until people take this country back. It is up to we the people to defend themselves from this alien invasion. What else could it be? What else could this be? When you see it all for what it is, this is an alien invasion. And the Bible tells you so. These demons, this devil, it's not from planet Earth. This is an army from another world that has basically taken over. And that's what we're seeing right now. The pages of the Bible playing out before your very eyes. It's the mark of the beast on everything you buy. The barcode 666 right there. They're baby stepping you towards getting that mark of the beast on your forehead, on your arm. And, it's already on the products that you buy. It's everywhere you look, in fact. The television is 24/7 product placement for the dark side, for the devil. Desperate housewives go commit adultery. Instagram, why don't you participate in the sin of pride? Post a selfie. Be a little selfish. And on and on and on and on it goes. So that's essentially what we're looking at. I've just got to play this one more time in case you're joining us late. I don't want anybody to miss out and have any doubts about how corrupt this system is before we move on to the next section of discussion here, ladies and gentlemen. How's everybody doing out there? We're hacking the matrix. We're hacking the screw tube. We're exposing these aliens for what they are. Mass murderers, gatekeepers. Here we go. Listen to this.
Sure, this sounds incredibly promising. Walgreens, CVS with a drive-through test at diagnostics agencies. But we sat here in the Rose Garden back on March 13, and these companies were here, some other companies were here. By my count, only 69 drive-through test sites have been set up by the companies that were here. I'm wondering if you, and of course, Mr. Vice President, back in early March, you said we'd be at 4 million tests by the following week. We're just now got there in the last few days. So what have you learned about what went wrong, a month and a half, or over the last month and a half or 2 months, and what's going to go right now? What lessons have you learned from the mistakes over the last month and a half or so?
John, I appreciate the question, but it represents a misunderstanding on your part and frankly a lot of people in the public's part about the difference between having a test versus the ability to actually process the test. I mean, the truth.
So the question is, what went wrong? And the answer is, you misunderstood. You thought we were actually testing people. No, we just said we were going to send the tests, but we're not testing people. And you could see how Trump is smiling at that response. That just tells you how twisted these people are. And look, we'd like to say the opposite. This is a conservative broadcast. This isn't, Sodom and Gomorrah Hell Network live on television. This is a conservative broadcast. And we're supposed to be looking at a couple of humans representing, conservative ideals. What's more conservative than saving life, right? And here they are trying to kill as many people as they can. That's what they've done since the beginning of this epidemic. Have little doubt. They've done everything they could to make sure that everybody has been infected, that everybody has been affected, that everyone has received the worst possible advice in terms of protecting themselves. and any other information that might be relevant, any other information that might matter. These people are criminals, to say the least. And, they should be held accountable. Now, the latest, of course, is that Trump is going to sue China for $160 billion. Seems like a whole lot of money. Ends up being about $400, $450 a person. Do you think this experience was worth $450 for you? And do you think you'll even see those $450? That $1,200 check, I mean, they just charged it to our national credit card. They're just printing free money, which, will make everything worth less. It'll make the money that you have left worth less. That's how inflation works. There's no free lunch in what's going on here. And, it's just, it's cynical. Their responses, their reaction to this, it's been cynical, to say the least. It's really disturbing. I want to say hi to everybody out there in the audience. We can see you. Hi, Christy. Hi, Afisha. Mega Truth. We do not consent. Laura, Rhonda, Helpful Hints, Peter, and everybody else that's out there, all the regulars. Ben, what's going on? But you guys getting the drift with that video? Did you see the grin? Did you understand? Do you see the problems that are, that we're dealing with? They've unleashed airborne AIDS / Ebola / rabies at you. There's no putting it back in the bottle, and this restart, there's no telling how long it's going to last. Now, we've been exploring, cofactors that are aggravating this disease, and we've been, focusing a lot on inflammation and anti-inflammatories, especially the herbal kind that may help you manage this disease. Now, there's a lot of varying opinions on what is causing this disease. The virus is certainly a factor that you can't discount entirely at this stage. But the cofactors are important. We've noticed, where the big, epidemics have been, where the big casualties have been. And, of course, there's the list of official numbers. Now, these numbers mean hardly anything because they're hardly testing anybody. And, they say they've tested like 4 million people in America, something like that, 5.7 now. But we haven't seen any proof of that. There's no telling how real or fake these numbers are. But here's the list. Here's the official list of countries that are most affected, right? USA, Spain, Italy, France, Germany. Now, Germany's got a lot of cases, but they've got very few deaths. So what makes Germany special? We're going to look at that. What makes some of these other countries special that are reporting few deaths, like Switzerland and others? And, again, pollution is definitely a factor. We've seen that places with the highest pollution is affected. Milan in Italy has a lot of pollution. Northern Italy has a lot of pollution. New York has a lot of pollution. Eastern France has a lot of pollution. Spain, not as polluted. So it's interesting. We've also talked about EMF poisoning. We've talked about radiation and the effects that has on the immune system. Now, of course, the beast system on television is in denial. They're like, no, not the radiation. That can't be a cofactor, but it is. It absolutely is. And they're in full-blown denial because of the money that's involved. They're not honest. They're not being honest with you. They're absolutely not being honest with you. And, we've covered the cancer clusters at schools near death towers, and it's like leukemia, which is cancer of the immune system, of the white blood cells. No immune system? Well, obviously, the situation gets worse, right? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. This is really like basic math that anybody can follow. But they're like, oh no, 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 no. Okay, yeah, yes, well. We've looked at cases like Florida, which doesn't have a whole lot of pollution, but we see that Miami is the hardest hit area. Why? Well, there's a couple factors there, but one is that they've got the heaviest grid. Now, we want to focus on these places that are heavily impacted, like New York. Now, the outer boroughs is heavily impacted. Now, this map here, the red is 4G plus LTE. The purple is 5G. Orange is just regular 4G. So let's see if we can bring up the little, there we go, the little color codes, if you will. So we've, this map is available at nperf.com. Don't ask me what that stands for, but we'll provide a link for this. It's a very interesting map. You can choose countries and operators. But as you can see, New York is compared to other places, it's different. It's unique. Now, what's striking in New York, if you look at this map, here's Manhattan, right? So this is like New York, and all the rest of this is pretty much the ghetto, right? The outer boroughs. Now, if you look at, here, it's all pretty hardcore 4G plus LTE, except you've got this place here called Richmond Hill. It's all pretty much 5G. It looks like one of the most developed 5G networks in terms of being continuous. And if you look, of course, the mouse isn't showing up here, unfortunately, for some reason. But if you look here, it says South Richmond Hill, and we're going to move into Jamaica, which should be at the center of the screen. You can kind of make it out, right? Jamaica, right? This isn't Jamaica, the island. This is Jamaica, Queens. Okay, so South Richmond Hill. Now, there's only 2 hospitals that you ever heard of in New York. Elmhurst and Jamaica Hospital. Why Jamaica Hospital? Jamaica Hospital is right there. It's the closest medical center in the Richmond Hill area. This is where all these people go when they're sick. Jamaica Hospital. How bad was Richmond Hill hit? It crashed. Coronavirus sends hard-hit Richmond Hill businesses into survival mode. Richmond Hill. Richmond Hill. This is Richmond Hill. You can see it. All right. South Richmond Hill is basically the same thing. But if you look, South Richmond Hill is right next to Jamaica. Where do all the people from South Richmond Hill go? Jamaica Hospital. Right there. Right there. Richmond Hill. Let's see. Yeah, Richmond Hill, Jamaica Hospital. Now you can probably see it better. See that? See the correlation? Everywhere we look, when we start connecting dots to 5G LTE, we're seeing impressive results. When we start correlating, the major epicenters of this outbreak, there's something going on here. I don't think this can be ignored at all. All the more reason to get a meter, shop around. We found the one we like the best. You can find that on our website, stfnreport.com, the EMF 390. For $129 versus, the $200-300 you would spend for something that's probably crappier, in our opinion, in terms of, what it does. But check it out, shop around. You want to know what you're getting dosed with. You want to reduce your exposure because routers, cell phones, it adds up. Now, another thing that we've looked at is kind of like the density of the grid. There's certain areas where it looks a little more dense than others. And of course, this isn't probably the best visualization in terms of network coverage because it's just kind of like lines on the street instead of like wave patterns and beams and the like. But it gives you an idea of where the hot spots are. Now, of course, when we look at America, the hot spots, are pretty much all the purple deep red. And again, Florida is a real nice example of where 5G has an impact because Miami is the only place with 5G right now in Florida. and it's the place that's most heavily impacted. So Orlando's got Disney World and the like, right? You've got everything from Orlando out to Tampa Bay, which is pretty developed, but there's a lot of people there, but they don't have nearly as many cases and deaths as Miami. So, we looked at countries like France, for example. Here's a map of France. As you can see, it looks a lot more dense than most of America, really. Look at the American map. I mean, you see a lot of gaps. You see a lot of places where there's really nothing there. Especially, in the upper Midwest, right, where there's no cases. Another telling sign that EMF is a cofactor in this outbreak. Whether they like it or not, they better fucking come to the realization that this is real before more people are killed. So they can be in denial all they want, and this is what got us in trouble in the beginning. They were in denial, they kept dragging their feet, right? But, the evidence here is highly suggestive. Now we look at countries like France, right? I mean, it's way more dense. It's way more dense. Now, Paris had a huge amount of casualties. Look how dense the network. There's not a lot of 5G yet, but look how dense it is. When you come down to the street level, it is like completely dense, hardcore dense, compared to, like, here's Berlin. Germany had very few cases, right? When you zoom into Berlin, look at the gaps at the street level. Look at the difference in the saturation. I've brought the EMF 390 to Paris, and it was between 20 and 100 milliwatts wherever you went, for the most part. I mean, there was places where it was only like 1 milliwatt, but I mean, they are highly irradiated. Everywhere you go, there's no escaping it. It is full saturation. Compared to Berlin, it's a huge difference. Now, there's a network there, but it's not nearly as saturated. Now, look at Germany. Here's the German map, right? Hardly any cases. Look at France. The cases, have exploded. So France and Germany. You can see the difference in density. Again, the color codes are here for 3G, 4G, 4G plus, which is LTE, and 5G. Look at the difference in the density. And even in the most dense areas, there's still like gaps. There's a lot of places that just don't look like they're covered or saturated compared to, other places. Now, this is Switzerland. They didn't have, they've got 5G. They had a lot of cases, but they didn't have too many deaths. And, look at the difference in the saturation. And even in, the CERN capital of the world, remember CERN? Anybody remember that place? Like, the saturation isn't like Paris, and the cases weren't like Paris. Highly suggestive. Here's Milan. This is Italy. So, you can see northern Italy, quite dense, right? Not a whole lot of room, but what do they have in Milan? They got a lot of 5G already. And the density, it's not quite Paris, but it's full saturation. So you can see that they've got a high level of saturation in the EMF field and the 5G compared to other places in the country. Now, the northern part was the most affected, and it's also got the most networks, the most saturation, but especially the Milan area, right? Madrid, one of the few places in Spain with 5G. Not a whole lot of saturation, not a whole lot of pollution compared to the rest of Europe. But you can see that they've got the 5G. And the saturation, well, it's pretty hardcore. It's a little less, from, in certain areas, but there's a lot of saturation here and the 5G. Now, let's compare that to places that didn't get hit. This is Finland. Very few cases in Finland. And not a whole lot of saturation. Helsinki. Look at the comparison in Helsinki. So, you can see there's a stark difference between, the density. Look at France. Look how irradiated this country is compared to Finland. Right? Everybody in France is getting dosed. But places like Paris, it's just full saturation. No escape. And it was a hot spot. So you can bet that people in these environments have a weaker immune system. They have lower, white blood cells, white blood cell count. They're more likely to go critical. And this, of course, was backed up in the biology textbooks. To the letter, what we saw in the 1980s biology, microbiology textbooks on coronavirus is the exact same pathogenesis that we're seeing with this COVID. It starts with an acute infection. It goes systemic. It attacks the brain stem. It attacks the brain. It attacks everything like it was in the textbook. The heart, et cetera, the small intestines, the large intestines. Everything was just copy and paste. And they pretend to rediscover this today. But what this textbook said was that, immune compromising agents will make the coronavirus go from asymptomatic to critical or clinical. And that's exactly what we're seeing with the EMF. The EMF weakens the immune system. And those people, instead of just having mild cases, they're having clinical cases. More so. And there's probably other factors involved. I'm sure EMF isn't the only factor. This probably isn't the only reason why people are going critical. But I would suspect that this is, a very important cofactor. One that they'll never, ever, ever talk about because it's worth billions and trillions of dollars. And their beast system plan depends on it. Now look at India. Now here's really probably the big surprise of the whole thing, right? So India, 1.5 billion people, the worst conditions pretty much in the world, right? Slums, everything, people are just jam-packed. You couldn't get more, you couldn't get a worse situation for an outbreak, for the plague, right? But look at the density of their networks. It's not highly developed. There's certain places their bigger cities that have got, some networks, but the saturation is nothing. You can see the difference, when you zoom in here a little bit, so way from far away, it kind of looks like the same, but when you zoom in, you can see the difference in saturation. And, especially when you go into the street level, in the cities, it's just full-blown saturation. But here, when you go into, let's go to Delhi, New Delhi, that's their capital. How many millions of people? It must be 50 million people in that city, right? Look how undense the network is. It's incredible, right? You'd think it would be much more dense with all the people, but it's not that dense. You kind of have the appearance that it is, but it isn't. No 5G. Sparse network. And they've got all the disadvantages that you can dream of during a pandemic, literally, right? You've seen the train stations, you've seen the videos, the living conditions, right? But their cities are not as saturated in EMF. As difficult as that is to believe. And their pollution is through the roof, right? So when you look at cases like India and Florida, where pollution isn't a factor, it really tells us that pollution probably isn't as big of a factor as we think it is. Although it is, going to be a problem with, respiratory illnesses. And so you have to wonder, what is COVID-19? And, it could be that they released this virus just to make everybody think like, this is the cause. There's no telling that this is the cause of what we're seeing right now. We know that as soon as they flipped on 5G in China, all of a sudden all hell started breaking loose and people started dropping dead. That's what we do know. But, of course, you can't talk about that. But I think that when you look at what's happening in America, besides all of the other, cases here, you look at New York, for example. Why is this such a hot spot? Is it because they've got so many people? Well, we got a lot of cities with a lot of people, with comparable, population densities and ghettos and the like, right? We got a lot of different networks. We got a lot of different cities with 5G. What makes New York, so special? And the only thing that you can really reason from the observations is that they're activating it, with a certain frequency, like a radio detonated bomb. It's just a certain number that will activate the device. It's a certain frequency. What is that frequency? It's hard to say, but it looks like it was activated in this 5G site at South Richmond Hill, which is right next to Jamaica Hospital. South Richmond Hill was hard hit by this virus. And, one of the only hospitals where you actually saw people was Jamaica Hospital. Jamaica and Elmhurst. Otherwise, it was pretty much empty ghost town. Where's the most advanced 5G network in the New York metropolitan area? It's South Richmond Hill, right there. So it correlates really well. So does Florida. The only place that has a 5G network in Florida, not a whole lot of pollution, but they got 5G, is Miami. And they've got a fairly dense network. Now, look, none of this is conclusive at this stage. But I think it's way too early to rule out 5G. In fact, there's not a whole lot of safety testing on 5G at all. There hasn't been anything published, any type of long-term study with rats or monkeys or anything that's been published. Nothing. They're just unleashing this shit without, long-term testing on even animals. We're the animals. We're the test subjects. And look, would you fly a plane without thorough testing? Well, I guess Boeing would. But, would you release a vaccine without, years of testing? Oh, they all do. They all do. That's part of the initial rollout. They get feedback and, they decide if it's worth keeping it on the market. Literally, that's what they do. But I think that, the fact that, these states here, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, Montana, they hardly have any networks. I mean, it's real sparse, right? And they've got hardly any cases. Hardly at all. There's people there. There's cases there, but the cases are much more mild. They're pretty much all subclinical, asymptomatic. So there's cases, there's virus here that they're picking up, supposedly, but hardly anything goes critical. However, in these cities, there's a lot more critical cases, especially where there's the 5G. So you guys, you guys have to make a decision. Is it worth having, these death towers around? Is it worth having, this alien government around? How do we know that they're really human? All we know is that they're rolling out death towers. There's chemtrails. There's GMOs. There's fluoride. You might laugh at that because you haven't looked at the studies. You couldn't imagine what these people are really up to. But it's so much worse than no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's so much worse than, all of the war crimes put together. These people are, killing and getting away with it, and they maintain their appearance of legitimacy and authority while they slow kill the entire planet. And now they've brought it to the next level. They've unleashed their virus. And if virus were bullets, this is a war. And it's up to you. Is a bioweapon a real attack, or is it not a real attack for you? Now, you might not think there is a virus. Okay, well, how about these death towers? Is that a real attack for you, or is it not a real attack for you? And it puts us all in a very difficult position because we're expecting that our politicians are going to save us from the enemy. But it turns out they are the enemy. I know, very cliche, yet obvious. At this stage, very obvious. These people aren't going to help you because they are the enemy. And we're not trying to be cute. We're not trying to be, difficult. We're just stating the obvious. These people are doing everything they can to kill you, and they've got a monopoly on the system. You can only vote for their little cult of Republicans and Democrats. You can't vote for anybody else. They're the only ones that can participate in the political system. They're the only ones that have the keys to, the Congress building. They're the only ones that have the keys to the White House. It's never been in the hands of normal people. It's always been in the hands of this little cult of Republicans and Democrats. How many stooges are there, when you think about it? How many Republican, Democrat, Congress people and the like are in Washington, D.C. that actually work for government? It's just, a minute amount of people. In the whole country, maybe it's like 100,000 people. Maybe it's more, but it's nothing compared to how many people are in America. And we saw that, during the, exercise, the Boogaloo exercise, Operation Gridlock. You know how those exercises go real world? I think this exercise needs to go real world. I think, the free states should at least take their capitals back. And I think, eventually we should, do something about Washington, D.C. But, there's a reason why there's 50 states in America. If we were meant to be ruled by Washington, D.C., we wouldn't have 50 states. It would just be one state, right? But the power resides in those states, in the people of those states. We, the United States, we, the people of the United States, right? So there's 50 of us, 50 states. And, there's not much we can do about the scourge of Washington, D.C. right now. And, the White House that's at the tip of a pentagram. Maybe we can, zoom in here. Maybe this will show up. The pentagram. Probably not, huh? There's too much red shit here. But, oh no, you can. You can basically make it out. You can start seeing it right here. There it is. The mouse isn't showing up, but you can see it. It's right in the middle. You can see the little bunny ears, little two triangles, and it starts tipping at the White House. All right. 666 Fifth Avenue, 666 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's what we're up against. We're not wrestling with flesh and blood. We're wrestling with spiritual wickedness from heavenly places, from another world. That's what you don't understand. This isn't about humans. This is about aliens. And the people on TV, they're aliens. They're from a different world. Of course they're lying to you. That's a given. That's a given. And you can't quote what you're seeing on the television as some kind of moral authority. Oh, well, CNN says this is real. Or the White House says this is real. It's all this little cult of aliens trying to kill you. And you're actually quoting them. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the wrong thing to do. What you need to understand is that people need to defend themselves. They need to fight back before it's too late, before they fully exterminate humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this, you are the resistance.